Thank you, Alexa. Right. Anyway, you're probably all familiar with the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments tend to be an encapsulation of all of the 613 commandments in these 10 statements. They're like the most compact form. It's almost like the table of contents of the Torah. So number 4 in the Ten Commandments is Shabbat, the commandment of Shabbat, the Sabbath. What that tells me is that Shabbat probably encapsulates 10% or so, more or less, of the entirety of Judaism and the Torah. And it's very, very, very central. In fact, it is selected as one of the topics because it encapsulates within it all of the commandments that have got to do with the sanctity of time and the calendar and so on and so forth, all of which are very central. So that's number 1. Number 2, Shabbat has always been something in which we have, it has been seen as an identifying feature of the Jewish people. There were places where Jews were called, in certain parts of Russia, Subotniki, which means Sabbath observers. There are places where the Jews were called, named after Shabbat. Egypt would be an example in recent times, medieval times, actually. And it's also been in addition to that, it's also been an amazing psychological, sociological refuge for the Jewish people. We've had our ups and downs throughout history. We've had difficult situations, financial persecution, and so on and so forth. But there's always been, so to speak, a place that we can go and type of elevate ourselves. There's a story which is told in, I don't know if is Salonika in Greece, was a huge Jewish community before the Second World War. Although it started to peter out actually well before Second World War. But even during, up until the Second World War, when the Nazis killed most of the Jews there, it was a large Jewish community in Salonika. And the dock workers were mostly Jews. Most of the Jews, they worked at the port of Salonika in Greece. Most of the dock workers were Jewish. And so it was closed on Shabbat. Saturday was closed. So there's a reporter, non-Jewish reporter, who is there in Salonika, and he's walking with his host, and he sees some people walking along an avenue in Salonika, wearing these beautiful kaftans, right? long garbs, beautiful clothing, and they seem to be walking along without a worry in the world. They're eating some type of treat and families together. And he said, the reporter said, "Who are these people? Is that like the nobility of Salonika?" And he said, "No, they're the dock workers." Now he was not expecting that. And he says, yeah, they're Jewish dock workers and this is their Sabbath. But in his mind, he was seeing nobility. There's a book called The Shipwreck of the American Brig Commerce, which during the pirate wars in the Mediterranean in the 19th century against the Arab pirates in the Mediterranean, the United States sent the Navy and the Marines over, hence the Marine song, the Marine hymn, I'm sure some of you know it, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of, correct, Tripoli. So yes, what were the Marines doing in Tripoli in the 19th century? The answer is they were combating pirates. So anyway, one of the ships got sunk. And the captain, whose name was Captain James Riley, so a 19th century American naval captain. And he was washed ashore in Morocco, had a horrific time, captured by slave traders and so on and so forth. He eventually got away and he made his way to a city and he was saved. Basically, he was starving, dehydrating. A Jewish family took him in. And he describes how he wasn't sure who the family were, but there he is. He comes out of his stupor Friday night and he walks downstairs and he sees the family sitting around a beautifully set table with oil lamps lit above the table. And he says they're all wearing beautiful clothing. The food, French Moroccan cuisine, mind-blowingly good. He says the smell was amazing. He says they've got glasses of wine. He said they were reading from books even the children could read. He was surprised by that. I think he was from New Jersey. Anyway, so he's looking at this and he says, sorry, no offense, I'm in New Jersey too. Anyway, so, but he basically was amazed, and he found out that it's the Jewish Sabbath, which he kept calling Sunday, because he couldn't get his mind around the idea that Sabbath was not Sunday. So he kept calling it the Jewish Sunday. But again, as one of the great Hebrew poets, Achad Ha'am, once put it, he says, more than the Jews kept the Shabbat kept the Jews. It is a time, and it was a time where the Jewish people would be elevated above our banal existence and sometimes painful existence. And in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, he puts it very poetically, he says, many, many people construct buildings, palaces, cathedrals, mosques out of wood and stone and bricks and mortar. And they are sometimes very inspiring. He says, the Jewish people construct the most beautiful palace out of hours and minutes. And that palace is called the Sabbath. And I think he's so right in that. And it's something which is true everywhere. I'll just tell you briefly, one of my sons, when he was I have three sons who served in the IDF. So one of them was in Givati, which is an infantry unit. So he was studying, after he'd finished his service, he was studying in the yeshiva, and he got an emergency call up Thursday night for his unit. So there's a code on the phone, and he goes to wherever he had to go. And then they take him up to the Golan Heights, to the Syrian border. This is quite a few years ago. So what had happened was Syria had fired a mortar fire into the Golan Heights. So Israel always must respond to things like that. So a special forces unit was going to go into Syria, destroy the mortar position, etc. And my son's unit was there to provide security for the special forces unit, perimeter security, etc., etc. Something military, I'm not exactly sure. So anyway, they finally make it up to the area where they were supposed to be by Friday afternoon. And Friday lunchtime, they're setting up security, perimeter, patrols, recon, etc., etc. They finished doing all the preparations by approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. Technically Saturday morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, Friday night. And his unit are all religious guys. And they finished setting up 2 in the morning. They said, you know what, we should do Kabbalat Shabbat, the service, the beginning of Shabbat. And so they did, but they did a Carlebach singing Shabbat service, 2 o'clock in the morning on the Syrian border in the Golan Heights. He says they're dancing and they're having it was like they forgot for a moment where they were, right? And he said it was an amazing experience. Thank God the operation went well. The mortar was destroyed along with some terrorists. And they at the end on Sunday morning, when the officer gave his speech, telling the guys they did a great job, etc., etc. So he says the single most, the officer was not religious, but he said the single most inspiring moment, he says, of this entire operation was you guys dancing and singing 2 o'clock in the morning, Friday night for Shabbat prayers. He says that was unbelievable. And he says, I also forgot where I was for that moment. So that is a little introduction. Now, we know that the Torah defines Shabbat as being a time that we do not work. Lo ta'aseh kol malacha, do not do work. But some of you might be familiar with the fact that in Hebrew, there are different words for work, right? There's the word malacha, which is the word used on Shabbat, and there's another word for work, which is avodah. Avodah is the more common word that you may have heard of. Avodah is the word used for work in the context of the slavery in Egypt. It's the word avodah is the term for menial labor, for any type of work, usually is called avodah. Avodah is much more of a physics definition of work. You know, force times displacement equals work, right? That's like avodah. Malacha has a bit of a different connotation. Malacha is used, and if you look through the list of what's considered malachot, a malacha, it's a type of work which is a constructive exercise of human intelligence, which increases the utility of the world or of an object or of a place. In other words, it's an act that results in a significant increase in utility, and it's an act that shows the human mastery over the world by a constructive exercise of intelligence. So, for example, there are plenty of animals if they'd enter the if countries would be allowed to have their native animals enter the Olympic Games. Australia, we would certainly have kangaroos in the long jump, and there's no, you could have a Russian tractor driver and ballet dancer on steroids would not get anywhere near the kangaroo's leap. Right? You could have a country with dolphins. Right? Dolphins would swim circles around the top swimmers in the world. Right? Not a chance. Right? Animals can run faster. Animals can, combat. You can take Taekwondo, Judo, karate, Greco-Roman wrestling, and you could put up anyone, top Olympian against a mountain gorilla from Kenya. Would make mincemeat out of them. Not a chance, right? However, we could defeat animals in each of these areas if we use technology. So, for example, I could go faster than a dolphin on the water if I had a jet ski. I could drive faster than an emu or an ostrich, or even a leopard, etc. I could drive in my car. I could drive faster. I could defeat a gorilla in combat if I had a gun. Not, God forbid, that I would do such a thing, but I could. It is the uniquely human ability to harness the energy, the forces that exist in this world, and to utilize them to master this world, which we sometimes do very badly and mess up. Sometimes we do it okay. But that is that's why the one prohibition, which is explicitly mentioned in the Torah regarding Shabbat, is don't light a fire, because fire, of all of the things, represents something uniquely human. Only humans on this planet use fire. And there are many reasons that we're uniquely suited to do that, aside from intelligence, the length of the arms and the height, and et cetera, et cetera. But fire is really the basis of so much of our technology. When you think about it, whether it's chemistry, whether it's the use of metals in smelting and melting down metals, turning bauxite into aluminum, turning iron ore into steel, and so on and so forth, turning sand and quartz into silicon chips and into glass, and so on. It's all fire. So fire is the representative of this ability of the human being to master creation. So what God is telling us, according to the Torah, is one day a week, back off. One day a week, stop with the mastery, stop with the shaping of the world to my needs, right? And to acknowledge that ultimately we're not the ultimate masters, but God is above us. And so by refraining from that, what we're really saying is acknowledging that there is a power beyond us, that the world is not our slave, and that the world is not totally ours. And we have a responsibility, and we have moral and spiritual and ethical responsibilities, and to act in that way. So it's one of the most amazing ideas of Shabbos is that we are type of withdrawing from that type of expansive mastery, the type of activity that shows my greatness. So the truth is, pressing a button, not much effort. But when I close the circuit on the elevator, what happens is that sends that closes a circuit. The electricity traveling almost the speed of light which by the way is fired by a coal-powered generator on mainland China, which spins around the rotors of the generator and produces electric current that throws through the wires, goes to the substation in Hong Kong, Kowloon, and then it activates the electromagnets on the roof, which wrap around a rotor, which is an electric motor, and then they lift the elevator or lower the elevator. That's an amazing example of human mastery over the world by the use of technology, by the use of our intelligence, by the use of fire, by the use of electricity, etc. Going up and down the stairs is something which any animal can do, and it does not show human mastery. In fact, when I was a kid, I had a dog who always, for some reason, would like, if he got the chance to chew my yarmulke, would always like to try to do that. I don't think he was anti-Semitic. He was just a dog. But anyway, so one day I had a small little knitted yarmulke, and I'm leaning over the back stair of my house. I thought I dropped a tennis ball, and my dog and my yarmulke drops. And my dog sees it, and I see it, and I say, no, and we both run for it at full speed. Dogs can run much faster than humans downstairs. I could tell you that. He was so excited that he swallowed the yarmulke whole when he got there. He was as surprised as I was. He's like, I said, you idiot. Right. Anyway, so there is sanctity in my dog now. But let's leave that aside. So it is Shabbat number one is about this idea. And that is why in the Torah, in one of the way, when the Torah talks about Shabbat, one of the ways it describes Shabbat is as a remembrance, a reminder, a testimony to Ma'aseh. But I did not get the yarmulke back, and had he given it back, I wouldn't have worn it. But okay, but it is indeed Zecher L'Ma'aseh Bereshit, which means a reminder and a testimony to the deeds of creation, to the idea that there is a God who's a creator. I remember reading an article, I think it was in New Yorker magazine many years ago, in which they were talking about Rockefeller Plaza in New York City, where they have the big Hanukkah celebration stuff. So anyway, so Rockefeller Plaza was owned, it's actually owned by the people who own that building, whoever owns the building. So it used to be the Rockefeller family. I think now it's like a Matsushita Electric Corporation or something like that, right? But in any case, it says that in this article in New Yorker, they said there was this statute in New York State, in New York law, city law or state law, I don't remember what, which required that the Rockefellers close the plaza off to the public one day a year or a few hours a year, etc. Why? In order to maintain their ownership, because it's used by the public. Thousands of people go through there every day. People are ice skating there, drinking coffee there, etc., etc. So it looks public. The fact that the Rockefellers were able to close it off from public use was the way in which they retained, so to speak, their ownership. That was the symbol of their ownership. In a similar vein, Hashem says, you know what? One day a week, I'm closing off the world from your mastery, creativity, changing of the world, etc. And that's a symbol that the world indeed is mine and that you are guests, right? Welcome guests, but guests nonetheless. So that is number one. Number two, Shabbat is also described as Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, a reminder of the exodus from Egypt. I was in Egypt last week. Actually, I was scholar in residence for a tour group in Egypt last week. Very impressive. Pyramids, and Alexandria, Cairo, although I got to say the traffic in Cairo made me nostalgic for rush hour of the George Washington Bridge. I've got to say, I've never seen anything like it. Unbelievable. Never in my life have I seen traffic like that. In any case, the Shabbat is described in the Torah, in the Ten Commandments actually, as a reminder of the Exodus. Now, what has Shabbat got to do with the Exodus? I think the idea here is something also fairly simple, which is this. You see, the first idea of Shabbat is that the world is not my slave. The second idea of Shabbat is that I am not the slave of the world. We are not slaves to work. We work because we choose to do so. And the fact that we can cease working when we choose to do so shows that we are free. A slave is 24/7, 365. A slave lives, breathes, and exists for work. It's a horrific situation. It's terrible. And it's one of the great tragedies of our history that there has been slavery, and there still exists, by the way. But the slaves would always carry some symbol of their slavery with them. In some countries, it was some type of a head covering. Some countries, it was a collar. Sometimes it was a clay badge in some places. Different symbols, because the slave was a slave. That was it. That was his or her essence and existence was a slave. Judaism introduced the idea that a human should not be wedded to work, that a human should not be embedded in work, that we should be free. In fact, there's a law that says in the Talmud that a worker can quit at any time, no matter what the contract says, no matter what the arrangements of pay are. There is always absolute right of a worker to quit his or her job. Why? Because if they don't have the right to quit, that's a form of slavery. So Judaism says you can always quit your job, always. Right? And you can deal with the financial stuff afterwards, the contractors, but you can always cease and quit, no problem. Okay, and that is, I think, another aspect of what Shabbat's telling us to some degree. You know, there's an interesting rule on Shabbat. We don't carry stuff. I remember I was down in Austin, Texas, University of Texas in Austin, doing a program there for one Shabbat. I got back to the hotel room at something like 2 a.m. and very, very late. And I get to the desk and I'd realized I'd left my key in the room. They were mechanical keys, but I left it in the room. So I said to the front desk, I asked the woman at the front desk, I said, hi. She says, oh, late night, Rabbi. I said, yes, very late. I said, do you have a spare key to my room? She said, sure. Can I see your driver's license, please? So I said, I don't have my driver's license with me. It is my Sabbath. I do not carry my driver's license. She said, well, okay, that's fine. How about a credit card? I said, no, don't have my credit card either. She said, any identifying document? I said, no. She said, we have a policy. We don't give a key unless you have some identification. I said, madam, you called me rabbi, did you not? She said, yeah. I said, so how do you know I'm a rabbi? She said, oh, because we were told I was there for the consulate, Israeli consulate. So security had informed them that there was an Australian rabbi there that weekend. So I said, yeah, we were told an Australian rabbi would be here. I said, do I look like a rabbi to you? She said, yeah. I said, do I sound Australian? She says, yeah. I said, how many Australian rabbis do you think are staying in your hotel in Austin, Texas this weekend? You think there's a conference of Australian rabbis? Geez, mate, throw some children on the barbie, right? Throw some dry lizard, crack open a tinny, let's make some bloody kiddush already. Obviously, I am who I say I am. So she succumbed to logic, which is unusual, and she did let me into the room, so thank God. But why don't I carry stuff like that on Shabbat, right? Like my credit card and stuff like that. And right? Because the truth is, one of the ideas of Shabbat is that I should not be enslaved to material objects. I should not be, as we know, Esther, before she repented and became righteous, used to call herself the material girl. I refer here to Madonna, the great Kabbalist. But in any case, right, we should not be the material boy, girl, or Z, or whatever it is, right? In other words, I am not enslaved to the color of my credit card. Right? There's now a transparent credit card. That's ultimate prestige. You can hand it to the person at the store and they go like this. And I'm like, yeah. So, but there's this idea that these possessions should not, I'm not defined by the content of my wallet, by the title on my business card, by my driver's license, by the car, nothing. I'm free of that. So Shabbat is also a time which reminds us of the Exodus from Egypt, because it reminds us of the idea that we are not slaves to the world. And it reminds us, because it testifies to creation, by the way, the 7-day week, the fact that we keep the 7-day week is because of that pattern of creation, which whether it's literally 7 days or 7 periods, not really that relevant. But the 6 and the 1, the 6 periods, and then the 1 day of rest, that's reminiscent. And that is based on the 7-day week. There's no natural cycle on which the 7-day week is based. The year, the solar year is based on the seasons. The lunar year is based on the, well, there's no lunar year. The lunar months are based on the cycle of the moon. The day is day and night. The week, no natural cycle, but it's a fairly universal, not completely universal, but it is very widespread, both in obviously Christian and Islamic societies, certainly Jewish society, but even in societies that are not Judeo-Christian, not biblical based, many of them have 7-day weeks. Part of this is this idea of the testimony of Shabbat. So rest is a reminder of that as well. There's also another concept, which is that Shabbat is described. In fact, the Hebrew greeting on Shabbat is Shabbat Shalom. In Israel, there is no word for Saturday other than Shabbat. That's the word, right? So when you greet someone in Israel, Shabbat Shalom. In fact, so I got to tell you this. There's a guy I know by the name of Dave, who is a rabbi now, but he used to be a Dave. And Dave had gone for a summer to a yeshiva in Israel, Aish Torah it was. And after he came back from his summer trip to Israel, he had decided to try to observe the Shabbat. But he was having a very rough time. His family was not interested. There was no synagogue anywhere near him. There was no Jewish community. So it was not easy for him. So Dave's sitting there after a few weeks, and he's sitting there one Friday night in front of the television. This is a while ago. Television, for those who are not familiar with it, is like Netflix in a large box, etc. Anyway, but basically he's sitting there in front of the television, and he looks up to God and he says, "If I don't get a sign that you want me to keep Shabbat, I'm not doing it anymore." So God doesn't say anything. So Dave says, "I'll give you until midnight." He gives God until midnight. Says, "No sign, no Shabbat." Midnight, nothing happens. He says to God, "I'll give you a 15-minute extension." So, right? I'm sure God was happy, but he didn't do anything. Anyway, at 12:15, Dave says, "That's it. No sign from God. I'm not doing Shabbat anymore." It turns on the television. And at the moment that he turns it on, it happened to be Dave Letterman. You've heard of Dave Letterman, right? Was interviewing Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks, one of my favorite actors. So Tom Hanks then was very young. He'd just come back from a trip to Israel. It's a great interview. It's on YouTube, right? Interesting interview. And Tom Hanks just come back from a trip to Israel, and Dave Letterman is interviewing him. And he's telling him about his favorite day in Israel is Friday. He says, you know, Dave, it's great. People hang out on Dizengoff, cups of espresso, it's gorgeous people walking around. It's a great place. Things start to calm down. They stop working. He says, and then he looks into the camera and he says, and this is 12:15. Dave turns on the television. Tom Hanks looks into the camera and says, "Shabbat Shalom, Dave." So Dave looks up and he says, "Okay, I am convinced," right? Dave is now a rabbi, by the way, right? But basically, Shabbat Shalom is the term used. So there's a Shalom means peace. So what is it about Shabbat that is related to Shalom, to peace, etc.? So a couple of ideas here, a few ideas. Number one, there are areas of stress and tension that we all experience, probably all humans experience. There is tension between the human and the natural world, between us and nature, because we are, the creature that interferes most with nature. We're not the only. I mean, beavers do a good job, but in general, right? Human beings, do mess with nature in major ways, and there's a tension between us and the natural world. If a fly is bothering me, most of us will think nothing of just killing it. Bam, that's it. Walking on the sidewalk, ants on the sidewalk. I have a feeling most people would just step on the ants as opposed to over them. Okay. Not everyone, but a lot of people will. We don't think much about it. Oh, beautiful flower, rip it out of the ground, right? Come in here, honey, got you some flowers. I planted those this morning. Right. Anyway, so, but again, we tend to do this. I'm a member of I used to be a member of the board of an Orthodox ecological group called Kanfei Nesharim. So I was invited to the United Nations, had a committee, interfaith committee on ecology. So I went to this meeting, and the different clergymen from different religions were speaking, etc., etc. So they were floating the idea of having a one day a year, in which no one would drive. You just walk to where you have to go, unless there's an emergency, but everyone just walk wherever they had to go. Kanfei Nesharim was the organization's name, Wings of Eagles. So I don't even know if it still exists. I haven't been involved for a while. I'm still a tree hugger, but I haven't been involved in the organization. In any case, right, they floated the idea, wouldn't it be great, right? First of all, just think of the carbon emissions. If no one, if all over the world, people would not use their cars for a day. So, and people were talking about this and they say, there's no way, it's not going to happen. And I pointed out to the committee, I said, Orthodox Jews, we do this every Saturday. For 24 hours, we don't use our cars, right? And if you include Yom Tov, it's about a sixth of the year that we don't use our cars. Wherever it is Friday afternoon, God willing, that's where it will be Saturday night. And I don't use the car. So they were pretty amazed. They said, how do you get people to do that? I said, get people to do that. People love doing that. I don't have to contend with traffic, with the psychopaths in New York and New Jersey driving on the roads there. I don't have to worry about finding a parking spot. I don't have to worry about merging in front of the 10-ton truck who's driven by it doesn't matter. Anyway, so etc. It's a fantastic thing. So Shabbat brings shalom. On Shabbat, I'm not allowed to pluck a flower. I cannot smell a fruit on the tree lest I pull it off the tree. I cannot kill a fly on Shabbat. If there's ants, step out, you can kill. If it's a tsetse fly, which carries encephalitis, that's life-threatening, so you can kill it. So life takes precedence. I should point that out if anyone is in Ecuador or something. And anyway, but in general, you don't even kill a fly or an ant, nothing. Don't pluck a blade of grass. Don't pull a flower out of the ground, nothing. On Shabbat, there's a bit more shalom. There's at least some level of shalom. There's a recognition that we are fellow creatures. Yeah, it's a fly, yeah, it's an ant, but it's a living thing. Yeah, it's a tree, but it's a living thing. So I just leave it be. One day a week, right? So hopefully that gives me some sense of consciousness of the idea that we are also part of this very beautiful, massive thing called creation, and to treat it with care. So that is one aspect of shalom, of peace on Shabbat. The second area of tension is between us and other people. There is a Malthusian struggle for survival, which you can sometimes see at smorgasbords, but basically a struggle, a life and death struggle for survival. And we engage in that during the week. Usually with most of us, thank God, it's not life and death struggle, but it's a struggle. The competing in terms of making a living, in terms of which slice of the pie, and obviously, battling with traffic and all these type of things. That's all tension between one person and another. And what we try to do is on Shabbat to reduce that, create shalom. On Shabbat, you're not supposed to walk more than like a few miles from outside the city. You stay where you are, more or less. We don't go and drive, we take walks. It's a different thing. When you walk as opposed to driving, it's a totally different, there's an awareness of the environment, of other people, of the atmosphere. We're not using our phones, are not multitasking, right? You have a conversation and there's actually a conversation. Unbelievable. It's not interrupted by, sorry, I have an offer from Nigeria for some investments. So I have to stop the conversation. Seriously? Right? On Shabbat, there's a sense of peace and harmony between, and we have family meals together. That's unfortunately, it used to be common. People would eat family meals together in the evening. I don't know how common that is nowadays. People's idea of a family cooked meal is whatever, I don't know, Boston eatery, home cooked meals, right, etc. Right? No, right. But being at home with the family, with friends, is just an amazing component, and that is part of the shalom between one person and another. The third area of discord is between body and soul, as Augustine put it: when the body rejoices, the soul mourns. When the soul rejoices, the body mourns. We don't accept, and in traditional Catholic thought, that is considered to be the default state of humanity. We disagree with that. We feel that the soul and the body can rejoice together. Shabbat is a time where we rejoice both physically and spiritually. What do we do? First of all, physical enjoyment and pleasure on Shabbat is part of the Shabbat mitzvah. All forms of physical enjoyment, physical pleasure, good food, good wine, relationships, conversation, etc., intimacy. These are part of the beauty of the pleasures of this world and the pleasure of life and the rejoicing and the enjoyment of the physical. But we combine that also with spiritual rejoicing. We have poetry. I don't know, people don't sing much anymore. You know what I mean? We listen to other people singing, or we do karaoke, which is good Lord, right? But again, right, at the Shabbat table, we sing together, we recite poetry. The Shabbat prayers are beautiful poetry. Lecha Dodi, great, written in Sfat in the 16th century by Shlomo Alkabetz, right? Inspired by the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who, by the way, lived in Cairo until he was about 30, right? So all these things, amazing stuff, and it brings peace into the human being between body and soul. The body and the soul can rejoice together, right? The soul's elevation does not require ignoring the body, and the body's enjoyment does not require ignoring the soul. They can actually both have attention paid to them. It's a time of spiritual creativity. It's a time that we actually do some study of Torah, and we try to talk about it. Type of interesting, when the subject of conversation, I mean, actually in our house, subject of argument, are usually ideas from the parsha, etc. But that's a beautiful thing. That's a really great thing. And so peace, shalom, is that aspect. And one other aspect of shalom also is the reduction of stimuli, external stimuli. In other words, we are often bombarded with information or misinformation or both. We are bombarded with sound. We are bombarded with light. I mean, you walk down the street in any major city, billboards, and of course, three-dimensional billboards, Seoul, South Korea, awesome billboards. But nevertheless, billboards, and you could be in the subway, or you can hear the rapper. Someone got tiny earbuds 50 feet away, and I can hear every expletive of the rapper singing. It's like very disturbing, right? You're driving in the car and you can hear music, and right? We never have much time. It's always so much input that it's very hard to actually sit and think, contemplate, meditate. Very important stuff, right? To get back into the self. There's a term we use on Shabbat vayinafash. Vayinafash literally means to rest, but has another meaning. Nefesh means soul. Vayinafash is a verb using the word soul. I don't know if I can translate that, but it's almost like withdrawing back into the soul from all the expansion and the input and the distractions of the week. Shabbat is that time. There's a fascinating statement in the Talmud. Talmud says that Adam, the size of Adam before the sin, was stretched from one end of the world to the other. When he sinned, he was reduced to our size, 6 foot, well, in my case, 5, but whatever, right? He was reduced, right? So what is the meaning of that statement in the Talmud? I think what it means is that the human, in the original form, the human was godly, vast, incredible, saw the world in a unified way, in a spiritual way, etc. And when we sinned, we were reduced to these pathetic primates, but with less hair, right? What we're basically doing is just trying to find more food, but instead of running around looking for nuts and berries, we are looking for bitcoins, etc. It's pathetic, right? And Shabbat the word Shabbat means also return. Lashuv means to return. So it's a time of return to the true nature of the human being, who is godly, magnificent, powerful, right, spiritual, etc. You can't get that when you're in the rat race. So one day a week we withdraw from that, and we get to a state of shalom and a lashuv, to return to the pre-sin state of the Garden of Eden. I'll end with the beautiful words of Heschel. When he talks about Shabbat, he says the following. He says, there is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to conquer, but to be in accord. that realm of time is Shabbat, and that's one of the reasons that the greeting is Shabbat Shalom. So that's a little bit of an introduction to Shabbat. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. And thank you very much for watching, participating, and
thank you so much, Rabbi Becher.
Pleasure.
Wonderful as always. So enlightening. And I assume you're open for questions if anyone has wants
I'm
to.
open. Yes.
I can give out your email address as well.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So we are going to break out our breakout rooms right now, and we'll meet back at about 9 p.m. See you all. All right, welcome back. Recording still. Don't need to record this. Great.